that was kind of student mode for you. Let's move into teacher mode. And my notes on here so I don't forget things, as I do sometimes. What's your thought about, any thoughts or questions about the process that we just went through?
What do you do when nobody says anything?
Ideally, you've primed the pump with a good entry event, which we didn't really do today, but we'll get to that more next week a little bit. What you did was an entry event, but not related to this. Does that make sense? So that's an entry event I've used with my class. The difference between what happened with you guys and them is I wouldn't have said, okay, here's what the barbecue sauce, here's what this is. I would have left it open and they would have had to figure it out. It might have taken them a week. So you're keeping the inquiry live. And I did a different one this year and I had a concrete paver and they could not figure out what that was. And they know I love concrete, so they were obsessed with the concrete, which had nothing to do with what it represented. But man, they came in the next day immediately guessing at 7 o'clock in the morning. And like, I couldn't sleep last night. I'm like, yes, winning. So a good entry event drives this, if that makes sense. Just some basic things on how to do it. Don't number or bullet point anything on it. None of these are more important than the other ones. And then we usually take and hang them on the wall, which I should do with this one. I don't think this is tapey, but we put them up on the wall. We do it for every class. So if you're teaching the same thing in multiple classes, hang them up the next day and so they don't steal from each other. But each class has their list of things that they're doing. Again, we don't rank them because none of them are better or worse than the others. And then I didn't do this today, but I usually would have a student write it instead of myself. And I don't worry about spelling or any of those things. You want them to have ownership of the project. So from a teacher point of view, that's some of what you're doing. You're trying to get them to buy in. You're trying to get what we would do next is next steps. So what's our next steps? And with our teams, we would create next steps here of what are we going to do? Which one of these are we going to attack first, kind of thing. I also want to show you a moment. Some alternatives. Because doing this over and over can get kind of old. So here's some other ways to do it. The butcher paper, I always like and come back to because the one thing I really like about this method is when I put it on my wall or I have it right here in front of the class, I don't forget about it to go back to it. Because you want to come back to this every day. You want to start the day off and say, okay, where are we at on these? And you'll see that process as we go through. One way that we use is Google Docs. So you guys, by the way, use Google Apps?
We started that this year.
Okay. Okay. So that's a great tool. So for tools, that's my number one favorite tool to use. So one of the things that we do is we use Google Doc. And so here's one we did on civil rights. And you'll notice at the top I have my state standards. So I like to put those on the top because we do an entry event, but they need to learn the standards. So part of what I tell them is if there's part of the standard you don't understand, you should be asking questions about these standards. So they know we have to do the standards also. So they can pull out vocabulary or things that they need on here. For this particular one, we had a kind of a semester-long theme of what is the best way to bring about social change. So we were looking at all different rights, civil rights, women's rights, immigration rights, gay rights, all different rights. So that was kind of our big theme. And then the driving question was how have Americans attempted to address the issue of racism in our country and also who is an American? And that comes from the Malcolm X quote, which I love. Sitting at the table doesn't make you a diner unless you eat some of what's on the plate. Being born in America doesn't make you an American. So we ask, who is an American? Then what students do is they come in here, and this is an open doc that anyone can edit. They put their name in, they all have to add a question. And so if you want to do this, a couple warnings. You have to teach them how to do this or it turns into a war. They all type over top of each other. So we tell them all to pick their own line and put their name on it first. So they're all going through and picking their own line, and then to keep them from editing over each other. And the first time you do something like this, I recommend finding a fun way to do it before you want to be serious about it, because they're just going to play around and mess around. So give them that chance when it doesn't matter, so that when you want them to be serious, you say, okay, we know how this works. We know that you can copy over each other and stuff, but we need to be serious on this one today. So, and usually there's still some silliness in here. This one looks pretty good, but you can see some of their questions. Before this, just to give you a little background, we watched a video like What Would You Do? You know, those ones on ABC where some white kids were destroying a car and no one calls the police, and then some African American kids were, and everyone confronts them and calls the police. Actually, I shouldn't say no one calls the police. Well, the white kids were vandalizing the car in a park, in an open space. Someone called the police because on some African American kids in the same parking lot that were sleeping in a car. And it turns out they were family members of the black kids who were later destroying the car, all actors. But the actors' family members, someone called the police on them, actually 2 calls, but didn't call on the white kids destroying the car. So that kind of got them going, like, you know, what's up with this? Then we had them do a Harvard bias test to see if you're more preference of European Americans or African Americans, which makes it, now it's personal, because now you have data in front of you that you can debate how legitimate it is, but that your own prejudice. And then finally, we ended up with a slideshow of a KKK rally from 1925, I believe it was. And we took away, it was a newspaper, all these pictures from the newspaper, and we took away, it had the date on it, it was July 4th, patriotic, yes. KKK rally of like 3,000 people in the city in 1925, and we blotted out, but it was actually Grand Rapids. And once they figured that out, they're like, no way, that happened here. So, again, the entry event had them right where we wanted them to, so they had all these questions on here related to those kind of things. So they were really surprised to see that in Grand Rapids. Other methods would include using a template. So I'll show you an example of that. And all these resources we'll make available to you later. So, but this one is just a little bit more organized than the other one, so you can have them put their group number in here, and they all have to write a no. What do you need to know? Again, they can all put it in there. Problem statements, which we'll talk about later. Next steps. So it's one template that they're all going to edit in and add their things. Maybe a little bit more organized. If you don't like the chaos of the other one, I kind of like chaos. But there's a template. Another way to do no's, needs, knows, mix it up, is Google Form. And this one is pretty basic. And this gets it individual. Nice thing about this is they're all going to come back to you in a spreadsheet. And so you can see every student's there. And if you want to grade it, I don't usually grade them, but sometimes the first time, make sure they've all done it. And it's the same kind of basic thing. Excuse me, knows, needs to knows. And you'll get all that sent to you in a nice, neat form. Further away is Padlet. Anybody familiar with Padlet? Used to be called Wallwisher. So this is just a thing where you post sticky notes on here, and you just make it, and you would give them the URL, and anyone can access it, and they can just put little sticky notes of their need to know on here. So it's just a fun way to mix it up, do it a little bit differently. Yes. All right. The last way is the no-tech way, which you just take note cards, give every kid a note card, write your no on one side, need to know on the other side. It could be like an exit slip. And again, for all these things, as long as they're putting their name, you have them put their names on it. If you want to grade it for something, make sure they're doing it, you can do so. Any questions about that one? So I guess just to point out the needs to knows here then, what we are going to work through here is the framework of PBL, is where we're going to kind of start and go through there. We'll kind of hit these things as we go. And in PBL, you have to be flexible. So not on the schedule, of course, was a discussion about which technology to use, but that's what you guys needed to talk about, so we did. So in your classroom, you're going to find same thing. What you may have planned might not be what you do today. And usually when it's not, it's really good stuff. So, because it's what the students need. So, you always have to be flexible in PBL.